Welcome back. We continue our discussion of skepticism and sources of skepticism. In the last video, we went over the 6 sources of skepticism and what is assumed in each. Today, we're going to go over informal fallacies. Remember, informal fallacies assume that if pseudo-argument will not succeed, then no argument will succeed. And that's why it was a source of skepticism, because it looks like an argument, and when we engage in what looks like an argument and we don't get anywhere, then we get frustrated and we sour to the idea of argumentation or making progress in discussion. So these are fake arguments. I'm going to give you a list of 12, but there are many more. A book back here that I use for my logic class, Socratic Logic, has at least 42, maybe even more informal fallacies listed, but I'm giving you the top 12, and I do want you to know them. I will ask you to know each of the informal fallacies and its definition. It will be on a quiz or exam, so you should know each of them, and as an educated person, you should know them. And you should think up your own examples. Sometimes my examples are outdated or not very creative or funny. I ask students to send me better examples, and they always do. So use your imagination and look for these fallacies out there in real life. For example, you'll see them when you watch, I don't know, the news or YouTube videos. If you look at the comments section in blog posts, videos, if you go on Twitter, lots of informal fallacies on Twitter. Listen to political debate, you'll see them. So what we want to do is be able to name these fallacies and not let them have power over us. We can say that's an informal fallacy, that's not a real argument. And we also want to not use them anymore. We want to, remember, clean up the discourse. This is like pollution. It's like throwing trash out of the car window in a discussion. So we want to not do that. So let's look at each of these and think about them. Okay? The first is appeal to fear. And this is the use of threat to persuade to action. Now, I need to tell you a story about Socrates. Hopefully you have read Plato's Apology and you remember the story of Socrates. Socrates was a philosopher in Athens, Greece, and he dies, I think, 390 before Common Era, so a long time ago. Socrates, maybe I should just tell you the whole story. He was a philosopher. He started when he was young, asking hard questions. He was looking for wisdom and knowledge. And he got known for being a person who wanted to know. And one of his students went to the oracle at Delphi, which is where the gods communicated with people and gave prophecies. So this student went to the oracle and asked, who is the wisest person? And the oracle said, Socrates. So this student went back and said, hey, Socrates, the oracle says you're the wisest man. Now, Socrates, being a philosopher, said, I wonder what the oracle could have meant by that. So notice he starts with meaning before truth. And then he must have had some sense of what wisdom was, because he didn't think he was the wisest person. So he thought there was a mistake here, and he was going to set out to find a person who was wiser than himself. And so he makes this lifelong journey to find wise people. And he begins with the politicians of his day. And he goes to the politicians and he says, you politicians, you talk about justice. What is justice? So he wants to know, what is it? And the politicians could give examples of just actions, people who acted justly, but they couldn't define justice. Now, I would put this challenge to you. Can you define the word justice? It's a very long discussion. It's a very relevant and current discussion. All right, but the politicians couldn't answer. And Socrates always had a group of young people following him around, and the young people saw that the politicians, the older people in authority, didn't know what they were talking about. And so the politicians kind of lost some respect in the eyes of the youth. Socrates then goes to the poets of his day. These are like the rock stars, the beautiful people. And he goes to the poets and he says, "You poets, you talk about beauty. What is beauty? What is beauty in itself?" Okay, he wants to know the essence of beauty. Now, I also would put this question to you. What is beauty? You should think about that. But they couldn't answer. They gave examples of beautiful things, but they couldn't give a definition of beauty. And again, the young people saw that those in authority, the rock stars, don't really know what they're talking about. And so they start to get angry with Socrates because they're being shown up in public. He goes to the artisans next. These are like the scientists of their day. And again, the artisans, they talk about stuff, they think they know, but they don't really have knowledge. They can talk about technical things in this area, but then they go beyond that and try to go beyond what they actually do technically, and then they make statements that they can't back up. And so Socrates is not able to find a wise person among the poets, the politicians, and the craftsmen. So he concludes, yeah, maybe the oracle was right. I am the wisest man. And his wisdom consists in knowing that he doesn't know. At least he's not making public statements about things he doesn't have knowledge about. So he doesn't stop there, though. It's not that he's happy with his not knowing. He really does want to know. We aren't sure what he actually came to know, but he is searching for it. Now, I'm telling you this story because at the end of his life, when he's 70 years old, he is brought to court by these three groups, the politicians, the poets, the craftsmen, and they accuse him of two things: corrupting the youth and teaching false gods or strange gods or gods not sanctioned by the state. All right, so he's bringing in some strange teaching, and he's found guilty. And this is a pure democracy. So there's I think about, I'm terrible with numbers, guys. I think like 500 people who are his peers in Athens, and they find him, a majority finds him guilty of these two charges, even though he defends himself very beautifully. That's what the apology is. It's a defense. So he's defending his way of life as a philosopher. He's defending philosophy itself. But he's found guilty, and this is where the appeal to fear comes. You thought I was on a tangent. Appeal to fear comes in here. They say to Socrates, you are guilty. Your penalty is either stop doing philosophy or die, the death penalty. Okay, so here's where the appeal to fear comes in. So I'm going to go back to the handout. The appeal to fear succeeds where one fears losing a secondary good over a primary good. Now think about Socrates. I hope you've read the apology at this point. And they are telling him, stop doing philosophy or die. If you know anything about Socrates, he is a philosopher. He can't stop doing philosophy. And he gives several arguments about why he can't stop doing philosophy. And so ultimately he has to drink poison, hemlock, and he dies. But he did not succumb to the appeal to fear. If he had stopped doing philosophy, then he would have succumbed to the appeal to fear. So that's what this means. It succeeds where one fears losing a secondary good, in this sense, his physical life, over a primary good, doing philosophy, which was for him the means to the good life. So he's not going to give up doing what's more important for something less important. And so that's why we say used against Socrates unsuccessfully. Now, I want to say a little bit right now about contemporary cancel culture. I think cancel culture is using an appeal to fear. We're afraid to speak our minds because we could get canceled, and that could mean losing your job or losing a position of influence. So that's a secondary good, isn't it? Isn't speaking the truth more important than losing your job? I'll let you decide. Depends on your view of the good. Well, we're in skepticism right now, but we're not going to stay there. So don't let others use the appeal to fear on you, and please don't use the appeal to fear on others. It's not an argument, And it's dehumanizing. You know how it's dehumanizing? It's not treating the other person as rational. So back to the apology with Socrates, he gave several really good arguments about why he can't stop doing philosophy, about why he's not corrupting the youth, why he's not teaching strange gods, and he can't stop doing philosophy. And they did not respond to those arguments. They just put him to death, basically. And so they treated him more like a person who, a being who's in their way and making them look bad, rather than a human being who's actually trying to help Athens. He considered himself the gadfly of Athens. He said Athens is like a big, fat, comfortable horse, and it's becoming lazy, and bad ideas are entering Athens, bad practices, and he's here to, the gadfly is a big fly that bites the butt of the horse to get it to move. Socrates was biting the butt of Athens to get it to move. He thought he was doing a good thing. He thought he was sent by the gods to raise these questions. So, appeal to fear, I think it has a lot of power if we don't treat people as rational. And treating people as rational means we are going to have to get engaged in discussion and conversation and not use fake arguments. It takes work. Thinking takes work, and I encourage you to do that work. It pays off too, I promise. Okay, appeal to pity. This one is also very popular right now. Appeal to pity is the abuse of the listener's disposition to compassion. It succeeds where the good of the recipient is not kept clearly in mind. It is often used to avoid responsibility where hardship is necessary. So that's a lot. Let's think about this. The abuse of the listener's disposition to compassion. So we tend to think people generally have a modicum of compassion, but this is pushing the limits. Okay, this is playing on people's feelings, if you want to think of it that way. It succeeds where the good of the recipient is not kept clearly in mind. So making a person feel bad and act on that. So it's use of feelings to get a person to act. And it's usually, it will work where the receiving person is not keeping the good of the person using the appeal to pity in mind. So I'll give you an example of how I see this sometimes. Students email me and give me some story about why they weren't able to take the quiz, and I'm supposed to feel really bad and change the due date for them. I try really hard to be fair to everyone, and if I change the due date for one person, that means I'm changing the due date for 200 people. And that is definitely not going to help people learn how to be responsible. I'm not keeping the good in mind for my students when I do that. So there are reasons that we have rules and discipline, and it's usually for the good of the person. But this is where we want people to change it for us, to have pity on me. It's often used to avoid responsibility where hardship is necessary. I'll tell you a funny story from a logic textbook. This is the other logic textbook that I use, this basic logic book. It has an example, and I think it happened in real life. A boy killed his parents with an axe. He was found guilty. He was up for sentencing and charging, and he says to the judge, "Have pity on me, judge. I'm an orphan. So go leniently on me. I'm an orphan." Well, why are you an orphan? Right? So avoidance of responsibility. I think this is very popular in our society today. We don't want to take responsibility, and we don't want to hold each other accountable. And it's because of skepticism. Like, who am I to hold somebody accountable? Who made the rules anyway? Okay, so we're going to have to establish authority somehow in something that is universal, natural, and transcendental. What would that be? Reason. Remember reason? Reason's the authority, and we have to use reason, not our feelings, to persuade each other. All right, so appeal to fear is using force, power. Appeal to pity is using feelings, but both of them are abusive, dehumanizing, and disrespectful. So we don't want to use either of those. We want to use reason and uphold one another's human dignity. Okay, moving along. Let's talk about the straw man argument. A straw man is arguing against a misrepresentation of a position rather than the real thing. Honesty and care are necessary to avoid the use of a straw man. So think about a scarecrow in a field there to scare away birds. It's a fake person, right? If you were to get into a fight with the straw man, you would win, right? So anyone who constructs a straw man argument is constructing a distorted view of a position, arguing against the distortion, and then claiming victory. I just saw this in a comment section on a video I was looking at this morning. A friend sent me a video. I'm making some videos on critical theory, and a friend sent me a video about a pastor talking about justice from a biblical perspective. And it was very basic. It was just like, here's what the Bible says about justice. But the comment section, people were saying the most crazy things, like claiming he was a social justice warrior and that he was woke and that he was compromising the teaching of the Bible. It had nothing to do with what he said, and it was misrepresenting what he actually said. So I challenge you to find this happening out there. There's another video I saw of Jordan Peterson. This is one that went viral. Jordan Peterson, I don't know if I endorse him or not, but he was talking to this English reporter, and he said something, and so then she goes, so what you mean is, and totally twisted what he said. So that's an example. You'll see these out there, arguing against a misrepresentation of a position rather than the real thing. I challenge you to go find them, name them, and don't let them have any sway over you, and don't let people get away with them. And if someone's doing this to you, you can say, I'm sorry, that's a straw man argument, and that is not a real argument. Can you please try again? See what happens. And if I do it, if you see me giving a straw man argument in my videos, in class, I invite you to please show me, and I will correct it, and I will thank you and probably give you extra credit. Okay. Let's look at the next one. Appeal to authority. Okay, so now we have to talk about something that we don't like to talk about, authority. And we have to accept the fact that there is such a thing as legitimate authority in the world. There are people who have insight, more insight than ourselves, and they probably should be listened to if they're giving us advice. Perhaps they're giving us medical advice. Perhaps they're giving us advice about COVID-19 or something that we're currently dealing with. Perhaps they're giving us advice about science, or perhaps there are professors. So we have to recognize there is such a thing as legitimate authority, but we also have to recognize that there are appeals to sources of authority that aren't actually based on that person's authority. So let me give you an example. I, hopefully, am an authority in philosophy. But if I make a statement about medicine and you go and use my statement as an argument about medicine, that is an appeal to authority because I'm not an authority in medicine. So let's look at this. Appeal to authority is appealing to someone as an authority where he or she is not an authority. This is often used where there is insufficient respect for the authority of reason. One time, I was teaching a class, and a person was trying to argue with me about philosophy, particularly about material monism, and he appealed to Stephen Hawking, who is an authority in the area of physics, but this person was using him as a representative of philosophy. And I had to say, excuse me, that's an appeal to authority. Stephen Hawking is an excellent physicist, but he's not an excellent philosopher. And you could just use reason to give me your argument rather than talking about another person and what they said. So you can go look for these appeal to authorities. They're out there, maybe a little bit harder to spot, but it's appealing to someone as an authority where he or she is not an authority, and it's in the context of an argument. Oh yeah, well, so-and-so says such and such. And you can say, oh yeah, well, so-and-so is not an authority in that field. So that's an appeal to authority, and it's a fake argument. So try again. What do you say? What's your reason for saying that? Draw them back into the conversation. Okay, I think I'm going to pause here and do a second video because we're going past the 20-minute mark, and I like to keep these a little bit shorter so you can go take a drink, take a break, get a drink, go to the bathroom, come back, and we'll talk about the rest of these informal fallacies.